The list of Western apps that have made it big in China is not super long. There are some great games on that list, including ones from major studios like Supercell and Riot Games. Cut the Rope and Fruit Ninja have made the cut. Subway Surfers is big globally. Of course, PUBG is huge as well. But as Josh Burns explains, it's probably easier to list the apps that have failed. He has a ton of experience with apps in general and China in particular. He's a former executive at Six Waves and EA and the founder of DigitalDevConnect. He's helped launch games for Kabam, Nexon, and Atari and manage games with intellectual property from Disney, Starz, Eminem, and the BBC. Now he helps apps enter the China market and Chinese apps enter the Western markets as well. I chatted with him recently, and along with a lot of advice about what not to do, he shared 12 keys to success in bringing mobile apps to China. Enjoy. Josh, who are you and what do you do?
I am been working sort of on my own for almost a decade. My background is in the gaming realm, so I started working in gaming just before the advent of the smartphone, which now seems like so long ago. But I've worked with a lot of different companies, a lot of different areas. But one of my areas of focus that I fell into was helping Western companies understand the Chinese market and secure like opportunities for their games. So that could be like giving them advice, strategy to sort of self-publish, or actually going out and helping them find like a local partner for their game to help bring it to the market. So worked with a ton of interesting companies like Zynga and others over the years to smaller early stage companies. So I think the Chinese market is always something people want to talk about, and it's very interesting. But the reality is very, very complicated, as we'll talk about.
Excellent, excellent. Can you tell us about a couple maybe that have succeeded?
Yeah, I mean, I think my sort of experience a lot is in the gaming side, so I think I'll focus there. I mean, uh, you know, I think, like you said, a lot of folks have tried, and unfortunately, not had much success. I think the reality is it's very difficult to predict as like a foreign company, like kind of what will be successful. So I think if you look at in the gaming side, like one of the best cases would be like Supercell.
Yeah.
So I think that's one everyone's familiar with. But I think the interesting thing is that they never sort of necessarily built their games with the intention to have, well, they didn't think about China necessarily as they were building their games. What ended up happening is they just were able to garner success through some of the innovations that they did. So I think that's an example of one that has great success, but not necessarily one that was thinking up front about, oh, when I'm building my game, how am I going to make this work in the Chinese market?
What
If
was
you
it? What was it? Is there something that about their game that just worked well? What was the scenario there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it generally speaks to their overall strategy as a company and to try and sort of incrementally innovate in a way there's something that a lot that's familiar, but enough that's unique and different, that's interesting, that'll appeal. So the interesting thing, if you had probably shown, say, Clash of Clans or an early Supercell game to somebody in the Chinese market, they would tell you, oh, this won't work. People don't enjoy these type of simulation based building games, but it obviously did. So I think this is one of the challenges with China is you obviously do want to do a lot of like diligence in advance, but I've seen this many, many times where part of that diligence, people are looking for sort of looking at from the lens of what's already worked or working. And so anything outside of that, they say, well, that's not going to necessarily work here because there's no sort of, and that's true. Look, I mean, that's true in general in all these verticals. But I think that speaks to the unpredictability of success in the Chinese market, that you can, be better prepared than anyone and have a better plan than anyone. But sometimes you can't predict whether your product will resonate, and things that shouldn't necessarily end up working. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
like you're saying, success is an outlier wherever you go, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, what was it, 5, 6 years ago? Who would have predicted that Flappy Bird would be huge?
Yeah.
Pokemon Go. I mean, who would have predicted that would become a long? I mean, everybody kind of thought that would die off, and yet it stuck around for quite a long time, right?
Yeah.
Many other things like that. What But on the other hand, what you're saying is challenging for people who are thinking about entering China to consider, because everybody wants there to be a playbook. Everybody wants there.
Yeah.
Let me follow it. What's the 5-step plan to success in China?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the challenging thing is I think you definitely do want to do diligence because the investment to enter the Chinese market is not insignificant. Even, uh, and that's why you see a lot of these larger companies, especially public ones, kind of shy away, right? Because there's a lot of regulatory complexity. There's a lot of ways you can get yourself in trouble. And I think, I think from a sort of playbook side, I mean, I think you do want to do some diligence and you want to at least identify some directional indicators that whatever, whether it's a game or whether it's a consumer app, has any sort of potential in the market. Are people, is there a lot of interest in within your vertical if it's say photo and video or gaming, whatever subsegment of gaming, is there something out there that has any sort of traction that you can sort of at least do as a first filter.
Mhm.
And then I think from there, like I'm all about like the incremental sort of step strategy. What I see a lot is companies like they invest crazy amount of effort into this extensive plan about okay, we're going to translate the app and then we're going to look to localize like the app store pages so that it has it resonates better with the local audience if it's the graphics. Then I'm going to look at like maybe adding some additional features, or if there's maybe it's a consumer app that has content, if it's video content or photo content or even animations to make it more relevant. Then I'm gonna look at these local channels for marketing or acquisition. They do all of this work in advance, and the reality is you make the app live on the app store with a translation, and you realize in a couple of weeks that like nobody cares, nobody's interested. So when I work with like companies, especially like smaller and mid-sized ones, I'm like, let's take the first step, let's get it in the store, let's translate it, right? Super basic stuff. Like, what do we see happen? Are we seeing better like conversion from the organic installs in the store? Okay, let's go to the next step. Maybe it's pretty easy to change like the assets in the store and the iOS and the iTunes store. What are we seeing from that is, but I think you can learn a lot just based on the basic translation and look at the retention and these kind of things just to understand like, okay, is there any opportunity here? Like before I invest, 10x the resources, because what I see a lot is people, the Chinese market, for gaming is the biggest. For other verticals, is obviously quite large just based on the population, and people get these dollar signs in their eyes. And what ends up happening is you can do a lot and make a lot more money, but is it actually like profitable? So if you think of not only the out-of-pocket costs, but also like the resources that you're putting towards maybe the Chinese version of your game or app, like you could be doing something else that maybe is higher return. So, I'm all about the incremental steps.
It's pretty funny because you've got people who are probably used to a pretty agile software development methodology going totally waterfall in a
Yeah.
business strategy and entering a market. Maybe walk us through a couple examples of success. What have you seen? What have you worked on that worked? And what were the lessons you can draw out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my focus is in the gaming side, which is even more complicated than other verticals. But usually the reality is you really for sort of an intentional path of success, a lot of it is aligning yourself with a local like partner to sort of assist you in the market. I think it's if you look at even some of the biggest games, This is, let's rewind, say 3, 5 years back. Some of the biggest games that are most successful, like they all usually had a local partner
Mm-hmm.
to help with, you know, make, operating the game in the Chinese market, and then engaging customers, acquiring new users. So I think you have a lot of like pretty popular stuff like League of Legends and these kind of things. But I think from a predictable path, that's usually kind of what you want to take is looking for some type of partnership. I think that landscape has changed a lot because the market is so much more competitive than it was. Every year, like the level of competition increases, not
Mm-hmm.
order of magnitude, but a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those potential partners are becoming more particular about who they're gonna work with from the sort of foreign market. And then you add in a lot of regulatory complexity, especially on the gaming side, and that there's just a lot of overhead to kind of, climb over to
Sure.
have success, whether you're a company in the market or you're a foreign company. So, yeah, it's challenging.
So in terms of the ones that you've seen that are successful, you saw that first ingredient, local partner, which is changing because, of course, not just anybody wants to be your partner, and the ones that have done it successfully in the past are looking. It's kind of like a VC. Who am I going to work with now? Who's going to bring me the best return as well for my efforts? What are some other commonalities that you've seen among apps that have gone in and been successful?
Um, I think it's something like new and interesting, which is the challenge with predictability, right? So if you think about like early on, and like again, I come back to gaming because it's my area of focus, but early on, a lot of the foreign successes in gaming were because they were innovative and different
Mhm.
and not something you could have predicted. If you look at like some of the most popular games and like wow, like 7, 8 years ago, were these things like Fruit Ninja or Cut the Rope or Subway Surfers, which were pretty mass market kind of games, but at the time they were sort of genre defining kind of titles. And in the Chinese market at that point, there wasn't a ton of innovation in terms of gameplay. So with a local partner, they were able to find great success. But now things are very different. And there's a ton of innovation within the Chinese market, and even from a resourcing side, like as a foreign company, you probably will never be able to win that battle based on the size of the teams working on stuff, and the number of hours that they're focused on these things is crazy. So the speed is unparalleled.
That seems to indicate a couple different options, right? So you're a major global publisher. You've got games and apps, that are big globally, or at least big in your home countries or 5 or 6 countries. You've got a couple options. You've got a couple choices. One, you can take your massive global franchise and say, we're bringing that to China, right? Two, you can say, and that's kind of like a tactical thing, right? We have an asset and we're expanding it, expanding its market potential. There's potentially also maybe a strategic look as well, which is to say, you know what, China is a massive market and we want to be players in that market. And we're going to go in there kind of natively and maybe start games there and
Mhm.
not invest a lot per game, but build them there and take 10, 15 shots at it and see what we can come up with. That's amazingly successful. Have you seen something like that? Are people
It's
approaches like that?
so I would say right now it's actually working the other way around. So it's more that companies in that market are doing what you just described in the Western world,
Yep.
because they have a ton of resources, and they can crank stuff out pretty fast. So I think from this is where the regulatory complexity comes in and what you can and can't do as a foreign company in China on your own. And that's where there's advantages for the companies within Chinese market to expand globally, is they don't necessarily have that type of friction, to
Right.
be able to build and launch.
Except in India now.
Yeah, that's
And to
true. So
some
now,
extent in the United States.
yeah, and we're seeing more sort of regulatory complexity in all sorts of different markets. But I think, China is still like sort of the biggest one with the most complexity, where even things like your tech stack like doesn't work because the firewall
Mhm.
blocks like a lot of the services, and the way you think about just like building and releasing your native app is totally different.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
very like basic level of like development, you're kind of having to do things differently. Whereas, yeah, there's a lot of like becoming more like content rules and regulations, in other markets. But I think, still what I would say is like there's not a ton of, you know, especially on the gaming side, a lot of folks have tried to set up, stuff within China, and people still do, but it's more rare because,
Mhm.
you don't have a lot of the protections around what you're building, and things can go badly in many different directions. So I think that's why we see like more, conservative, especially for like public companies, like very few are doing stuff. If you look at gaming, non-gaming, like there's something usually already locally grown, whether it's like dating or gaming or photo video.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, it's not a brand new market anymore, obviously, right? It's a mature market. There's a ton going on there.
absolutely,
There's a ton of innovation, and there's a ton of money. But there are still external companies coming in. I want to get into some of the regulatory issues and some of the maybe even some of the tech stack stuff as well,
yeah,
which is related to the regulatory stuff. But I would love to still get, a couple things, a couple insights from companies that you've seen do it successfully. Is there anything else? You mentioned local partnership. You
yeah.
mentioned, different ways of innovating. What else have you
Yeah.
seen?
I, so I'd say one thing is being intelligent about how you engage like your users. So using the social channels to the sort of idea of like when the West we do customer support, you send an email and someone replies. I mean, you know,
Yes,
I think having like
you hope.
people who understand the native speakers understand how to engage your audience wherever it might be, if it's being able to do customer service over WeChat, or having those native speakers. I always push that as like a huge, for someone who's wants to get somewhere in the middle of complexity, like that's a huge step that a lot of
Hmm.
people like don't take necessarily. They try to do their customer engagement and community engagement like the way they've been doing it. So I think a company like King, I think, did some really interesting stuff in Asia, not just in China, where they went to where the people were, and then
Yeah.
tried to sort of engage them in that as a channel, rather than trying to sort of force fit, because things are very competitive, and you need to be more. I think the expectations for responsiveness, especially in a lot of Asian markets, is very high, in terms of
Hmm.
like turnaround time, and uh, you know people who spend a lot expect like very high touch, customer support. Even like some not it's not in a market like Japan, you have a phone number and stuff like this. So I think that's a really important area, because acquiring new users is going to be challenging and expensive, and you want to be intelligent about how you like kind of engage them. So I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
that's definitely one area that I think people who, I've seen some middle-sized companies where they, you go to the local university and you hire some native speaking, students who maybe understand like how to engage the Chinese audience or the Korean audience, can speak the language beyond the social channels. It's not like necessarily a super complex um, thing to fulfill, but a lot of companies kind of miss that mark.
Yeah.
But I've seen some middle-sized companies like Space Ape Games and these other ones be really smart about it, when they are entering these markets in Asia.
Very, very interesting. You mentioned King, you mentioned Space Ape.
Yep.
Anybody else that comes to mind when you think, hey, entered China, did it well, did it successfully?
Um, Not really. I mean, most of the learnings is what not to do.
Let's
I
go there
think,
then. What do you not do?
yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I mean, I think the main challenge that you run into is like as a company, you really need to have some type of partnership. It could be like just some legal entity that operates.
Mhm,
You effectively need a license to like have servers within China. You have to have
mhm,
a license, and to do that, you have to be, based on my last understanding, is like a wholly owned Chinese company. So there's no sort of like skirting the rules and this kind of stuff. So what happens is you potentially have to give up control, right?
yep.
And you have little legal recourse anyway. I worked at EA for Electronic Arts for a while, and they had some joint ventures that went sideways where their partner just decided to do something different, and you really have nothing you can do to sort
Mhm,
of
mhm,
course correct that. So that's, I think, one of the main hurdles where you see a lot of these. There's a lot of IPOs now, a lot of public companies, and in working with a lot of the gaming folks, I've seen become much more conservative as they get to that point, because the downside risk is financially, or just like from a PR perspective, is too great to even
yep.
want to bother trying to explore this a market that is the biggest potentially in their vertical. So that's a big one, is just uh, things going wrong with, and the reality is you never hear about it. These kind of things like aren't ever going to be talked about. You see the company, oh, we're going into China, we're setting up an office, and then one day like everything
Crickets.
sort of disappears, but it's under the radar. Um,
Success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan, right?
yeah, exactly. And so I think but there's plenty of gaming examples like from Kabam and stuff where they invested a lot of resources to sort of bring a big title into the market, and it just didn't get that traction. And that's where I come back to that, like take incremental steps rather than a giant, huge investment that has a huge launch and stuff.
Mhm, mhm,
Especially these, I mean, this is even 3, 4, 5 years ago when things were much less competitive,
mhm.
and there was less sort of regulatory complexity. So, um, you know, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that regulation. You mentioned you've got to have a local partner, you've got to get servers, you've got to be a wholly owned Chinese company. I've read that you need like 5 different permissions at different levels of government and different organizations to get going. Can you shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main ones is to think about is kind of this idea of like a license to operate like as an internet company. Effectively, there's ways to navigate it, but in general, that's kind of the main hurdle, is that it has to be kind of like a wholly owned Chinese entity. And I think there's the server stuff. I think there's ways around it through like Amazon, but then you can't have your audiences have to be like bifurcated or something, like they can't overlap,
Yep.
because then you get into the censorship side, which is basically gaming is easy. There's different sort of taboo or even things that are not allowed, like you can't make mockery of the government officials. That's an easy way to get blasted out of the
Mhm,
stores pretty fast. But then
mhm.
there's sort of like gray areas where for games, you need to have your game basically be approved to be
Yes.
available. There's a lot of loopholes that effectively are now fully closed, and at least in mobile gaming. But there's stuff like things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, like you don't skeletons in your game is like a taboo thing. You don't want to
Oh,
do that.
wow.
If you look at something like those like uh, a PUBG, they tried to release the original version, but they changed it to be like a more less gory no blood and this kind of thing. Even stuff like there was a game that had a map. There's controversy in China about like the boundaries of the country and from their perspective, and like the map in the game, by Nepal was like not in the right place, so that was like that had to be like changed. So the rabbit hole goes deep pretty quickly, I think, from the gaming side. But I think effectively it's the ability to moderate. So the recent one is like Clubhouse, right? Clubhouse launched, and there was a huge uptake because it's not a game. It's available. It can be available in the Chinese apps, the Chinese country on iTunes. But one day it just wasn't available anymore, and that's basically comes down to the censorship, right? Like people can go on there, they can talk about whatever they want, they could say bad things about the wrong people, and that's not acceptable. So I think that's going to be will always be a huge issue as a lot of the stuff becomes more social. There a lot of apps, regardless of whether it's photo, video, like gaming. You're doing more real time like social interaction. It becomes very difficult, like how to moderate that, and is very difficult. And I think, look, the reality is if you're a small company outside of gaming, you can probably get away with a lot because nobody cares about what you're doing, say on the iTunes store. But again, coming back to these bigger companies that are high profile, a ton of scrutiny. And that's where they're just kind of like, yeah, it's a huge market, but we don't want to get in trouble. It's not worth the complexity. Just from the very beginning of setting up, some legal company to operate in, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's why you see a lot of, folks partner with bigger companies like Tencent and this kind of thing, because they can help, obviously navigate a lot of these processes and create a lot of, reduce a lot of the friction. Like Roblox is coming to China, and it's through a joint venture with Tencent. So, that's the value of a partnership from many ways. So I think the regulatory side, a lot of it, comes back to the censorship, and then like the firewall, and how that impacts like maybe the tools and technology. Well, it's become a lot better than it used to be, but there'd be games that were run on like Google infrastructure that like wouldn't work. They'd be available in China, but the game wouldn't work because all the technology was
absolutely. And even if it would work, it'd be super slow because it's trying to get out over a long distance.
Yeah, and people didn't, back then people weren't sophisticated to know that was actually, people were downloading their app or game and no one could, actually, use it. I think we've come a long way, but it's like an easy takeaway where you can you need to think through that sort of really basic stuff that you don't for the other 150 whatever countries that the App Store supports.
Yeah. Excellent. So if you have a new client come on board today and they want to go to China, you're getting them a local partner. You're starting really, really simple, very low cost. You're getting them on the various app stores that are there in the app markets. And then you're saying, hey, as you see success, increment, build, grow from there, correct?
Yeah. So I would say yes, generally. I think I would say first, so I also do see a lot of people thinking they spend hours investing in trying to talk to different companies for a local partnership before doing any type of diligence around what their product is.
Yeah.
And maybe doing some like basic testing, like, put the app live in China and, translate it and do something to kind of make yourself feel better. Cause I see people invest so much time in I'm going to talk to Tencent and NetEase and all these different, huge companies and ByteDance and this kind of stuff. And the reality is like, there's no opportunity for them, in general, but the scale that you need to be able to reach a very significant scale to even be interesting for like the middle tier companies in the market. So I think like people they come back, they see the dollar signs and they like want to invest a ton of time. And so I think you want to do a lot of stuff to kind of figure out first, what is the opportunity, so you can at least feel like is worth investing. Because what happens is you spin your wheels to do all this stuff, to talk to all these people, and then your whole, you could have been making a new app for
Yeah.
the United States, or you could have been doing 20 other things, especially if you're a smaller company, where you just kind of like wasted so much, time and effort for fairly minimal opportunity. So I think even before really diving in at any level of depth, like, do something to really feel like there's some meaningful potential here. I know we did talk to like the Supercell, situation where it wasn't planned, it wasn't predicted, but look, the reality is that's like, you might as well buy like some lottery tickets. It's not something to be replicated. So I do think there's people need to do, it doesn't matter how big you are, to really feel confident that there is some type of opportunity even before, having, trying to talk to local partners.
It sounds like you have to speak to a lot of people who want to go to China, and you tell a lot of them, don't even bother. It's really challenging. It's really hard. It's really
Yeah.
expensive. It's really, 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 it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
What is that the case? Would you tell the average publishing house that comes to you, hey, forget about it, and send and bill them, invoice them for
Yeah. I mean,
$100,000 for that
no,
advice?
I mean, it's
Or
funny. Like, I
what do you
talked
do
to,
to the
I even talked to, really big companies. It's probably not to my advantage, but I'm basically like, look, I can try and help you to talk to these different companies to, explore partnership. But, here's a realistic perspective is like, even for the companies in the market to make a successful product is very, very, very high. So the probability that, some foreign company can come in and reach a scale that's interesting for them is very low. So in a way, yes. I
You're a
am
horrible salesperson.
I am telling them to not bother necessarily, but I think the thing I will say is like, I think people have these like crazy expectations because it's such a large market. So what I do say is like, look, like there is some opportunity for everyone. So let's do like the basic stuff, translate it, update the app store assets.
Mhm.
I can buy a ton of local like iOS traffic on, the traditional, networks, right? Because everyone
Right.
has, inventory. So like there is accessible, and maybe that's actually going to get you, 50% of the revenue opportunity for your product.
Wow.
So yeah, maybe you can't get the next, I don't know, maybe let's say it's 25. It doesn't necessarily matter, but it's like very low effort for
Yes.
some like opportunity. Because what a lot of people would do is they never release their app in China because they were like, oh, I'm going to work with Tencent in like, a year. I'm going to do this. And where the reality is like the thing's out, it has some traction everywhere else. Like just put it out there, like at least capture some opportunity through some easy, like low effort things. And that's where that could be your sort of evaluation process. If you are seeing like something really interesting, then you go to the next steps.
So that is actually interesting, because what you're saying there is, A, disabuse yourself of the notion that you're going to come in and immediately get 500 million downloads and be amazing, incredible, wonderful. But take the easy steps, do it simple, get it out there, and see what happens. Now, you're talking about the iOS App Store quite a bit.
Yeah.
How's that different from Android? And are there differences in terms of legalities as well?
Yeah. So I feel like I keep saying like, oh, this is more complicated than the thing I just mentioned, but it is. Android is more complicated than iOS. I think it's interesting. It has become less complicated. So on Android, there's no Google Play Store.
Yep.
You have sort of this landscape of Android app stores that are controlled by sort of different companies in the market that maybe have a primary service like antivirus or
Mhm.
photo video, and then they also distribute apps. So the good thing is that's become more consolidated over the last like 4 or 5 years. The challenge there is that again for games you can't be in any of these stores unless you have a license. although that's true now for iOS. It's been true for longer for Android. I think the challenge is like it's not very well set up for foreign companies. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the documentation is not in English. There's some folks that can help you navigate this and get your Android non-game app into these stores, but it's just you need a different bill binary for every store. They have all different SDKs. The SDK, like the SDK I'm not from the technical side, but from what I've heard, like the documentation is not very good and not in English. So
you still need a local partner.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some more service provider models for folks that can help you with navigate some of this. But there's just like a lot of complexity to get out there. I think,
let's start here then. Minimum viable China product. How do you do that? What are the ingredients you need there for a minimum viable China product?
So my perspective is like if I'm telling somebody maybe it's early in development of something and they're asking about like Chinese market and this kind of stuff. If they're a Western company, I'm basically saying to them like, look, make your product for the market that you understand, which is the West. If your product is not going to work there, then it doesn't even China doesn't even matter. So I think that's just like a main takeaway early on is like you need to get this thing working in your home market. You need to have sort of that base where this is engaging some
Gotcha. So let's assume you've got that. We've got publishers who have a baseline. They're super successful. They do what they're doing. They want to go to China. Minimum viable product to go into China. What are the 3 things they got to do, the 5 things they got to do, the 2 things they got to do?
Okay. I think table stakes is obviously localization.
Yep.
So simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese. If you want to support both mainland China as well as Hong Kong and Taiwan. I think, again, I'm coming from the context of like you have a product that works. How can you modify it slightly to be more relevant? I think, you look at like if you have social sharing, like can you support the local channels? It's like WeChat. I think you maybe look at if you have a microtransaction or some type of in-app purchase model, like depends a lot on the audience, but a lot of the Chinese users, especially on Android, are used to making very small, very, very small payments, small purchases. So you might want to look at kind of your business model set up from that perspective. I think what else? I think looking at like ad monetization side, if that's part of the model, making sure you're have the strong partners, if it's Pangle or whatever for like for ByteDance or something, just making sure that have the right partners that are going to maximize your revenue. I think on iOS, I'd say these days it's not less of an issue because most people have like a big enough audience in those markets. But and then looking at things that aren't going to work, like if it's something built by Facebook or Google, if it's like monetization or some type of tools or technology. But I'm all about, if you have to reinvent the wheel, like it's not going to be worth it. So the core experience, like, that has to work on its own without significant changes. Yes, you can add more, in the future if it is working. We see that a lot with gaming, adding, characters and content that's more relevant to like Chinese audience.
Sure.
There's a lot of case studies there, but yeah, I mean, it's nothing super sexy. I think it's just, making sure it's those basic stuff that can make it usable for like the Chinese audience, as long as you're.
So you've got localization. You've got localization of your app. You've got localization of some of the things in your app, whether that's monetization, where it monetizes and how it monetizes. If that's advertising, if that's micropayments, whatever. You've also got localization in terms of services that you use, cloud services, identity services, stuff like that. So it's sort of your baseline technical stuff. You've also got to get onto the iOS App Store because perhaps you're doing that first because it's one place and you're already there, and
Yeah,
so that's super easy. You do
except
need a local partner for that as well, right? Because you need permission for that. Is that correct?
not only for games. So if you're not a
Okay.
game, you can publish. Oh, I should rewind. So if you're a game that does not have in-app purchase, you can self-publish. So if you're hyper casual and you're ad based, no problem. If you're paid in-app purchase or subscription, or paid or in-app premium or in-app purchase, I believe subscription too, you would have to have the licensing. So
Interesting.
iOS is always a great, that's what I'm always about. Like, get something out there, like make some money with what you have. That's going to help you understand like if there's more opportunity from there. It's
Interesting.
make it
Interesting. So that
available.
works. iOS works. Then you got some idea. Hey, let's
Yeah, I
do it
mean,
on Android and go to those,
if you
Baidu's App Store and Alibaba's App Store and Tencent's App Store and all that stuff.
yeah, and then you can look at like some local, so it's like, okay, I've released my app. I'm seeing some positive numbers. Like maybe the metrics are better than I see on average. Okay, well, maybe I'm gonna add some local, if it's a game, localized content.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an app, maybe some additional features. Okay, I'm gonna do some marketing specifically for like Chinese, for this market. I'm gonna buy on traditional, the Western HQ company, Iron Source or Unity. I can buy iOS Chinese traffic. And then if that's working, then I can maybe look at, okay, Android, then I can release some of those Android stores. Then I can look at some more like localized marketing. I can look at some, local ad networks that can
Cool.
support even iOS. And then I can, look at adding, deeper like content integrations that might be more relevant to the users.
Yeah,
So I think that's where we think about this kind of like stepwise sort of process, because
that
as you
makes sense.
increase the complexity and effort increases, so you want to make sure that the key is ROI, right? It's not more revenue, it's more profit, right? Because
Yeah.
very easy to invest a lot of time. And you're in Vancouver. I mean, I don't know what they're up to these days. Hothead Games. I remember doing an event with them, and I remember the guy was like, "Yeah, we made a ton more money, but in the end, like when you look at the revenue share and the effort and the resources, we made maybe like 5% profit or something."
Shoot, not good.
Yeah, it's just like, and a lot of people, maybe it's unprofitable. Even though the revenue looks real sexy, it's actually like not profitable versus like making a new app or a new game.
Mm-hmm,
That's
mm-hmm.
that's where people, I think, quickly kind of go off course.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have
Cool.
to ask, what is that picture in the background that you have 35,000 of?
Yeah, I gotta do something. It's the picture that comes with the frame.
Okay, that's a little bit sad.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
looks
It's
cool.
been like 2 weeks, so it's still acceptable, I think.
Yep,
Still have it
yep.
there, but
You're on the edge.
yeah, it's for like record to put like a record in it, and I just like haven't got around to that step. But
No worries.
I think I gotta at least like take the thing out because it looks. Someone was like, "Oh, that's a really like a unique, piece you have in the back," and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, it's
I'm
just
sure you could sell it as an NFT for like $50 billion. It's very artistic. So,
yeah." I'm
uh,
telling you what, you can get it at each from Walmart for $5 or something.
okay, don't tell anybody. They won't know. They'll pay you 2 or 3 Bitcoins for it at minimum. Um, awesome, Josh. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it.
Cool. All right, thanks so much.